In the dying light of the 41st millennium, where humanity clings to existence beneath the baleful gaze of hungry gods, there burns an eternal flame. It is not the golden radiance of the Emperor's throne, nor the warming hearth of home and hearth, for such comforts are luxuries the Imperium cannot afford. No, this is the fire that purifies, the fire that consumes, the fire that devours both the guilty and the innocent with equal, ravenous hunger. To live in this galaxy of endless witch hunts is to breathe smoke that carries the screams of the damned. It seeps through hab-block ventilation systems, mingles with the recycled air of forged worlds, and settles like ash upon the tongues of children who have never known a world without the taste of burning flesh. Every citizen of the Imperium awakens each day to the same terrible certainty. The pyre that claimed yesterday's heretic may tomorrow bear their own name carved into its blackened stones. The paradox is absolute and inescapable. Fire, the sacred element of purification blessed by the Emperor's own light, has become the instrument of annihilation. The same flames that consecrate holy oils in cathedral ceremonies reduce entire bloodlines to memory and smoke. Purification and destruction dance together in an eternal waltz, their steps marked by the rhythm of crackling wood and the percussion of collapsing bone. In the underhives of Necromunda, where darkness pools like spilled promethium, children learn to fear not the mutant gangers or the toxic rain, but the sound of boots on metal grating, the measured tread of those who come to ask questions that have no safe answers. In the scolums of terror itself, beneath the shadow of the Golden Throne, young minds are taught to recite the catechisms of suspicion alongside their prayers of devotion. On agri-worlds where amber grain waves beneath alien suns, farmers pause in their harvest to watch for signs that their neighbors' devotions have grown too fervent, or not fervent enough. The witch hunt is not an aberration in this galaxy. It is the natural state of being. It flows through the Imperium's veins like poisoned blood, necessary for survival yet toxic to the soul. Every breath taken in the Emperor's domain carries with it the possibility of being the last drawn in freedom, for freedom itself is a luxury that only the dead can truly claim. The fire burns eternal, and its hunger knows no bounds. It consumes the guilty with righteous fury and devours the innocent with equal appetite, for in the eyes of the Imperium, there is no meaningful distinction between the two. There are only those who burn now, and those who burn later. The only question that matters is not whether the flames will come, but whether you will face them with a prayer upon your lips or a scream caught in your throat. But routine never lasts in the Imperium, for even the grinding machinery of oppression requires constant feeding, and the fuel it craves is suspicion itself. Life in the Emperor's domain is not lived, it is performed. Every citizen of the Imperium steps onto the stage each morning, donning masks of devotion and loyalty that grow heavier with each passing year. The theater never closes, the audience never sleeps, and the critics who judge each performance wield not pens but plasma rifles. From the moment a child draws their first breath in the sterile air of a medici facility, they are enrolled in this endless audition for survival. In the creches of hive cities, infants are taught to recognize the aquila before they can speak their own names. Their tiny fingers are guided to form the sign of the Emperor while their eyes are still learning to focus. The first word they babble is not mother or father, it is loyalty, repeated until it becomes as natural as breathing. The education continues in the scolums, where children learn arithmetic by counting the number of heretics burned in their sector, and practice their letters by copying denunciation forms. Teachers move through classrooms like patrolling sentries, their augmetic eyes recording every gesture, every whispered conversation, every momentary lapse in attention during the daily recitation of the Imperial Creed. Students learn quickly that to excel academically is dangerous. Intelligence breeds questions, and questions breed heresy. Better to remain safely mediocre, invisible in the grey mass of acceptable incompetence. In the manufactorums, workers clock in not just their labor hours but their loyalty quotients, measured by the enthusiasm of their hymns and the frequency of their denunciations. Shift supervisors carry clipboards thick with loyalty assessment forms, marking tallies beside names like bookkeepers of the soul. A worker who reports their bunkmate for mumbling in their sleep receives a small mark of commendation. One who fails to report suspicious behavior receives a mark that follows them like a shadow, growing darker with each omission until it becomes a noose of parchment and red ink. The bureaucracy of suspicion operates with mechanical precision. In the administrative sectors, scribes spend their days processing denunciation forms. Form 4 Alpha for suspected heretical thought, Form 7 Gamma for deviant behavior, Form 12 Omega for the catch-all category of suspicion pending investigation. The forms multiply like viral infections, each requiring 3 copies, 5 signatures, and 7 stamps from different departmental seals. The scribes who process them learn not to read the words. Literacy in such matters is a burden that breaks minds and souls alike. Families gather for their evening meal around tables set not with warmth but with watchfulness. Parents teach their children the art of careful speech, where every word is weighed and measured before being released into the toxic atmosphere of imperial discourse. Conversations flow through predetermined channels like water through ancient pipes. Safe topics include the weather, but not if it's too good, which might suggest heretical contentment, work productivity, but not if it's too high, which might indicate unholy enhancement, and neighbors' activities, but only in the proper spirit of vigilant concern, not malicious gossip. Children learn to edit their dreams before sharing them at the breakfast table. A nightmare about diamonds is acceptable. It shows proper fear of the Emperor's enemies. A dream about flying or exploring strange worlds is dangerous. It suggests an unhealthy imagination that might attract the wrong kind of attention. They practice the art of strategic confession, admitting to minor infractions of thought or deed that demonstrate proper self-awareness while concealing anything that might be construed as true deviation. The evening rituals of imperial family life have evolved into elaborate performances of normalcy. Fathers lead prayer sessions with just the right amount of fervor. Too little suggests lack of faith, too much suggests fanaticism. Mothers supervise children's homework with careful attention to ensure their offspring express orthodox opinions in their essays about imperial history. Even bedtime stories are curated for ideological purity. Edited versions of ancient tales where heroes always serve the emperor and endings always affirm the righteousness of unquestioning obedience. In the quiet hours after curfew, when even the night shift workers have retreated to their assigned quarters, the true weight of this existence settles over the Imperium like a shroud. Citizens lie in their beds, listening to the distant sounds of prowling arbitrators, and conduct silent inventories of the day's interactions. Did they show sufficient enthusiasm during the morning loyalty oath? Was their greeting to their supervisor appropriately differential? Did their child's teacher notice anything unusual in their behavior or academic performance? Sleep, when it comes, offers no escape. Even dreams must be monitored for signs of corruption, and morning brings the fresh terror of wondering whether subconscious thoughts might have leaked into mumbled words that listening ears could misinterpret. The cycle begins again with each dawn, an endless spiral of performed loyalty and practiced suspicion that grinds souls to dust as surely as any industrial machinery. Yet beneath the surface, something began to stir, not rebellion, for that would require courage that the Imperium has systematically bred out of its citizens, but something far more dangerous, the simple, terrible power of a whispered rumor. The disturbance began, as such things often do, with something small and seemingly insignificant. In Hive Block 37, in a HAB unit no different from 10,000 others, a child named Jorik Halen had begun to dream with unusual vividness. His dreams were not the standard nightmares of imperial youth, visions of demon incursions and heretic uprisings that were considered healthy signs of a properly indoctrinated mind. Instead, Jorik dreamed of gardens. Not the corpse-fertilized victory gardens that sprouted in hive-bottom waste reclamation centers, but impossible gardens where flowers bloomed in colors that had no names and trees bore fruit that tasted of forgotten sweetness. He dreamed of skies that were blue instead of the standard imperial grey-brown, and of waters that ran clear instead of the blessed toxicity that marked all properly sanctified liquids. Most dangerous of all, he dreamed of silence, vast, peaceful expanses where no vox speakers crackled with loyalty reminders, no sirens wailed production quotas, no marching boots echoed the eternal patrol of authority. The child was 7 years old and had not yet learned that some dreams should never be shared. At the morning meal, while spooning down his regulation gruel, he mentioned to his parents that he had dreamed of a place where people smiled without fear. His mother, Hala Halen, felt her blood freeze in her veins. His father, Castor Halen, dropped his spoon with a clatter that seemed to echo through their cramped hab unit like a bell tolling doom. The parents exchanged a glance heavy with terror and recognition. They knew the statistics. 73% of suspected psychomanifestations began with reports of unusual dreams. They knew the protocols. Immediate reporting to local arbitrators was not just recommended but legally mandated. They knew the consequences of failing to report, complicity charges that would see their entire bloodline erased from imperial records. But they also knew that reporting their own child would guarantee his death, and likely their own. For 3 days, the Halen family lived in a state of paralyzed horror, trapped between the certain doom of reporting and the equally certain doom of remaining silent. Jorik, unaware of the catastrophe his innocent words had unleashed, continued to share fragments of his dreams, each revelation twisting the knife deeper into his parents' souls. He spoke of places where people chose their own work, where children played games without keeping score for loyalty assessments, where music existed for beauty rather than propaganda. The secret could not hold. In the Imperium, secrets are like pressure in an over-pressurized hab unit. They inevitably find the weakest point and explode outward with devastating force. The rupture came when Jorik's teacher, Instructor Valdris, noticed that the child had been drawing unusual pictures during art period. Instead of the standard subjects, Imperial eagles, space marine warriors, or scenes of righteous battle against Xeno's filth, Jorik had drawn trees. Not the twisted, blackened husks that served as botanical specimens in the hive's educational materials, but trees with full canopies and healthy bark, trees that seemed to suggest a world where growth was possible without corruption. Instructor Valdris had been teaching in the Imperial Scholarm system for 27 years. She had seen 3 purges of her teaching staff, survived 4 loyalty investigations, and learned to navigate the treacherous waters of imperial education through careful mediocrity and strategic blindness. She knew how to ignore the signs of malnutrition in her students, how to overlook evidence of domestic violence in their families, and how to pretend not to notice when children disappeared from her roster without explanation. But she also knew that willful ignorance of potential psychoactivity was a career-ending mistake that could easily become a life-ending one. The report was filed on a Tuesday. By Thursday, the whispers had begun. In the Imperium, rumor travels faster than light and spreads more efficiently than any virus. Within hours of Instructor Valdris submitting her concerned observation to the Scholarm authorities, the whisper network of Hive Block Tertius 7 had transformed a single child's unusual dreams into a potential demon cult in their midst. The story mutated as it passed from mouth to ear, gaining malevolent details with each retelling. Jorik's dreams of gardens became visions of Nurgle's plague gardens. His peaceful silence became psychic communication with chaos entities. His innocent sketches of healthy trees became blasphemous sigils that corrupted all who viewed them. Neighbors who had known the Halen family for decades suddenly remembered suspicious incidents that had seemed harmless at the time. Castor's tendency to work late shifts was reframed as secret cult meetings. Hayla's habit of humming while doing chores became evidence of heretical hymns. The family's quiet nature, once appreciated as proper imperial reserve, was now seen as suspicious secretiveness that surely concealed dark rituals and forbidden knowledge. The power of rumor in the Imperium lies not in its accuracy but in its utility. Truth is a luxury that most imperial citizens cannot afford, but suspicion is both free and profitable. Denouncing a neighbor might earn a small reward from local authorities. Failing to denounce a neighbor when suspicion later proves justified brings certain punishment. The mathematics of survival make paranoia not just rational but mandatory. Mrs. Kellyan from the adjacent Hab unit was the first to act on the growing whispers. She had been looking for an opportunity to ingratiate herself with the local arbitrator patrol, hoping to have her own son's minor infraction overlooked. The Haylan situation provided perfect cover for a strategic denunciation that would demonstrate her loyalty while eliminating potential competition for scarce Hab space allocations. Her report, filed with careful attention to bureaucratic protocol, noted suspicious activities including unusual quietude during loyalty recitations, and failure to properly celebrate the Emperor's Ascension Day with prescribed enthusiasm levels. The domino effect was swift and merciless. Within days, other neighbors began filing their own reports, each seeking to position themselves as vigilant citizens rather than negligent bystanders. The local Hab block supervisor, terrified of being seen as incompetent in his oversight duties, launched an investigation that expanded to include not just the Haylan family but anyone who had failed to report suspicious activities. Soon, suspicion spread like spilled acid, eating through the social fabric of the entire block as citizens scrambled to prove their loyalty through the denunciation of others. What seemed ordinary soon revealed its true horror, the realization that in the Imperium, the most dangerous weapon was not the bolter or the flamer, but the whispered word that traveled in darkness and struck with the force of absolute authority. The rot that spreads beneath the Emperor's light is not the obvious corruption of chaos cults or Xenos infiltration. Those threats can be identified, isolated, and purged with righteous fire. The true rot is far more insidious. It is the systematic destruction of human connection, the weaponization of love, and the transformation of community bonds into instruments of mutual destruction. It grows in the spaces between people, fed by fear and watered with the tears of the betrayed. In Hive Block Tertius 7, the community that had once existed began to cannibalize itself with methodical precision. The investigation into the Haylan family's suspected heresy expanded like ripples in a toxic pond, each wave carrying fresh accusations and new terrors. Citizens who had shared meals, celebrated birthdays, and mourned together at sanctioned funeral rites now regarded each other as potential threats to their survival. The arbitrator teams that descended upon the block discovered a population eager to prove their loyalty through the currency of denunciation. Patrol Sergeant Vulcan, a 20-year veteran of Hive Block investigations, had never seen citizens so enthusiastic in their cooperation with Imperial justice. His report noted with satisfaction that interview subjects volunteered information faster than his scribes could record it, offering details about their neighbors' activities that demonstrated impressive levels of surveillance and suspicious interpretation. Mrs. Kellyan, emboldened by the positive reception of her initial report, expanded her accusations to include the Haylan family's extended social network. She recalled that Castor Haylan had once lent tools to Martin Voss, clearly demonstrating an unholy alliance of mutual aid that undermined proper imperial self-reliance. Hayla Haylan's participation in informal childcare arrangements was reframed as evidence of a conspiracy to indoctrinate multiple children with heretical concepts. Even Jorik's friendships with other children became suspect. Why else would an innocent child associate with one so obviously tainted by corruption? The mathematics of survival drove neighbor against neighbor with algorithmic precision. In the Imperium, loyalty is measured not by positive actions but by the absence of negative reports in one's file. Citizens learned that the best defense against suspicion was to generate more compelling targets for investigation. A neighbor's misfortune became one's own protection. Their destruction served as proof of one's vigilance and devotion to imperial truth. Martin Voss, faced with accusations stemming from his association with Castor Halen, made the strategic decision to demonstrate his loyalty by revealing information about his own family. He reported that his wife had expressed sympathy for the Halen family's situation, a clear indication of heretical sentiment that prioritized human compassion over imperial justice. His teenage daughter had been seen reading recreational materials beyond her assigned educational texts, obvious evidence of intellectual pride that could lead to dangerous questioning of imperial doctrine. Even his elderly father's occasional confusion about current events was presented as potential evidence of senility being used to mask heretical activities. The cascade continued as each accused citizen sought salvation through the denunciation of others. Families split along lines of survival strategy, with siblings reporting parents, spouses betraying each other, and children offering evidence against their own kin. The social fabric of the block unraveled thread by thread, until what remained was not a community but a collection of isolated individuals united only by their mutual terror and their competition for the favor of imperial authority. The arbitrators processed this flood of information with bureaucratic efficiency that would have impressed even the most demanding administratum clerk. Forms were filled, reports were filed, and evidence was catalogued according to protocols refined through millennia of imperial witch hunts. The beauty of the system lay not in its ability to distinguish truth from falsehood, such distinctions were irrelevant, but in its capacity to transform human relationships into actionable intelligence for the machinery of imperial justice. Patrol Sergeant Vulcan noted in his daily reports that the investigation was proceeding with exceptional smoothness. Citizens were not merely cooperating with imperial authorities, they were actively participating in the holy work of purification. The traditional resistance that marked most heresy investigations was entirely absent, replaced by an enthusiasm for justice that demonstrated the proper functioning of imperial indoctrination. His superiors commended the efficiency of the operation and marked Hive Block Tertius 7 as a model for future investigations. As the net of suspicion widened, it became clear that the original target, young Jorik Halen and his dreams of impossible gardens, had been forgotten in the rush to demonstrate loyalty through denunciation. The investigation had achieved a momentum independent of its initial purpose, becoming a self-sustaining engine of accusation and counter-accusation that fed on the terror of the community it was meant to protect. The true horror was not in the individual acts of betrayal. Those could be understood as desperate attempts at survival in an impossible situation. The horror lay in the systematic perfection of the process, the way that imperial doctrine had so completely colonized human psychology that citizens required no external coercion to destroy each other. They had become willing participants in their own mutual annihilation, convinced that their actions served a higher purpose while secretly knowing that they served only fear. But routine never lasts in the Imperium, and the comfortable horror of community self-destruction was about to give way to something far worse: the arrival of those who wore black and spoke with the authority of the Emperor's own voice. The Vox horns crackled to life at precisely 6 o'clock Imperial Standard, their amplified voices cutting through the morning air like blades of consecrated steel. The citizens of Hive Block Tertius 7, already gathered in the designated assembly areas for their mandatory loyalty recitations, felt their hearts sink as the familiar cadence of imperial authority filled their ears. But this was not the routine morning broadcast of production quotas and loyalty reminders. This was something far more terrible. Citizens of Hive Block Tertius 7, the amplified voice began, each word precisely enunciated with the mechanical perfection of augmetic vocal enhancement. By the authority vested in the Adeptus Arbites, by the golden throne of terror, by the wisdom of the Emperor's own divine judgment, and by the sacred duty to preserve humanity from the corruption that festers in darkness, you are commanded to attend the sermon of purification. The arbitrators marched through the Hablock's main thoroughfares in perfect formation, their carapace armor gleaming with fresh applications of sacred oils. Their riot shields bore the aquila of imperial authority, polished to mirror brightness that reflected the terror in citizens' eyes back at them with doubled intensity. Behind their helmets, their faces were invisible, transformed into faceless instruments of imperial will that spoke with voices filtered through vox grills to remove any trace of human emotion. Chief Arbitrator Draven Karsk led the column, his rank insignia marking him as a 20-year veteran of Hive pacification operations. His augmetic left eye whirred as it focused on the assembled population, its red sensor beams sweeping across faces with the mechanical precision of a targeting system. Each citizen felt that gaze upon them like the touch of death itself, knowing that their every expression was being recorded, analyzed, and filed for future reference. Hear now the words of truth that burn away deception. Arbitrator Karsk's voice boomed through the vox amplifiers mounted on his armor. In this Emperor-blessed galaxy, ignorance is not a flaw to be corrected. It is a virtue to be cultivated. Knowledge beyond your station is corruption beyond redemption. Questions beyond your need are daggers pointed at the heart of imperial truth. The sermon continued with the remorseless logic of imperial doctrine, each phrase crafted through centuries of refinement to penetrate the human psyche and reshape it according to the needs of the state. Citizens listened with the desperate attention of the condemned, knowing that their survival might depend on demonstrating proper comprehension of the lessons being delivered. Children pressed closer to their parents, seeking comfort that their elders could not provide while maintaining the appearance of stoic acceptance. You have been blessed, the chief arbitrator continued, to live in ignorance of the horrors that lurk beyond the Emperor's light. Your minds have been spared the burden of truths too terrible for mortal comprehension. Your souls have been protected from knowledge that would drive lesser beings to madness and corruption. This ignorance is not weakness, it is the greatest gift the Emperor can bestow upon his faithful servants. Behind the arbitrators, moving with the silent precision of shadows given form, came figures that made even the black-armored enforcers seem approachable. The inquisitorial agents needed no introduction. Their presence alone was sufficient to identify them as servants of the most feared institution in the Imperium. They wore no visible insignia of rank or authority, for their power transcended such mundane markers. Their faces were hidden behind featureless masks that reflected nothing and revealed less, transforming them into living embodiments of judgment without mercy or appeal. The lead inquisitorial operative, designated only as Agent 077, carried no visible weapons yet radiated lethality with every measured step. The citizens who watched her approach felt instinctively that she possessed the authority to end their lives with a word, to erase their names from imperial records with a gesture, to condemn their bloodlines to eternal damnation with a simple notation in her data slate. She was judgment incarnate, terrible not for her cruelty but for her absolute indifference to human suffering. Knowledge, Chief Arbitrator Karsk proclaimed, his voice rising to fill every corner of the assembly area, belongs to those who have proven themselves worthy to bear its burden. The servants of the Emperor's Inquisition carry this weight so that you need not. The Space Marines of his Adeptus Astartes face truths so terrible that mortal minds would shatter at their contemplation. The officers of his Imperial Guard make decisions based on information that would drive common citizens to despair and heresy. The assembled population absorbed this sermon with the desperate hunger of the starving. Each word offered the promise of absolution through ignorance, the comfort of knowing that their lack of understanding was not failure but protection. Parents felt relief wash through them as they realized that their children's questions about imperial policy could be answered not with dangerous explanations but with the blessed phrase, "That knowledge is not for us to possess." Yet even as comfort was offered, the sermon carried its barbed hook of terror. But ignorance, the chief arbitrator continued, his augmetic eye fixing on individuals in the crowd with targeting precision, must be coupled with vigilance. You may not understand the nature of the threats that surround you, but you must recognize their signs. Corruption wears many faces, the face of curiosity, of compassion, of doubt. Heresy speaks in many voices, the voice that questions, that suggests, that wonders why things must be as they are. Local officials who had administered Hive Block Tertius 7 for decades found themselves kneeling in the assembly area alongside the citizens they had once governed. Supervisor Kelvin Brass, who had filed the reports that initiated the investigation, discovered that his 23 years of loyal service provided no protection against the scrutiny of imperial justice. His knees pressed into the rough ferrocrete as he listened to the sermon, knowing that his survival depended not on his past loyalty but on his future ruthlessness. The school instructors, including the unfortunate instructor Valdris who had first reported Jorik Halen's suspicious drawings, knelt in a separate group marked by their educational robes. Their faces showed the particular terror of those who worked with information daily yet understood how dangerous knowledge could become. They had spent their careers teaching approved truths to imperial youth, but now faced the possibility that even approved knowledge might be suspect if it failed to prevent heretical thoughts in their students. The local priests of the Imperial Cult, men and women who had dedicated their lives to interpreting the Emperor's will for their community, found their theological training transformed into potential evidence against them. Their deep knowledge of imperial doctrine, once a source of authority and comfort, became a burden that marked them as possibly too informed for their own spiritual safety. They knelt with the special humility of those who understood exactly how dangerous their position had become. Truth, Agent 077 spoke for the first time, her voice cutting through the assembly area like a blade of pure authority, is not a democracy. It is not subject to interpretation, discussion, or doubt. Truth is what the Emperor's servants declare it to be, nothing more and nothing less. Your role is not to understand truth, it is to embody it through absolute obedience. The sermon concluded with the traditional recitation of the loyalty oath, but the words carried new weight in the presence of those who wielded absolute authority over life and death. As citizens raised their voices in unison, proclaiming their devotion to Emperor and Imperium, they knew that their words were being recorded, analyzed, and judged by standards they could not comprehend. The comfort of ignorance was balanced by the terror of being found insufficiently faithful despite their blessed lack of understanding. What seemed like instruction soon revealed its true purpose, not education but the systematic preparation of a community for the trials that would determine who among them would see another dawn, and who would feed the flames of purification that burned eternal in the Emperor's name. The trials began not with the fanfare of imperial justice but with the mundane efficiency of bureaucratic processing. Forms were distributed, Form 77 Tertius for self-declaration of loyalty status, Form 23 Gamma for reporting observed suspicious activities, and the dreaded Form 1 Alpha for voluntary confession of heretical thoughts or actions. Citizens queued in orderly lines, their faces blank with the practiced neutrality that might mean the difference between life and death. The processing center had been established in the block's primary assembly hall, its walls now decorated with the banners of imperial authority and the mechanical hum of cogitator banks brought in to catalog the flood of information. Servo skulls drifted through the space like mechanical carrion birds, their Auspex scanners recording biometric data and their Vox thieves capturing every whispered conversation for later analysis. Young Jorik Halen, the child whose dreams had initiated this cascade of terror, sat in a holding cell no larger than a storage closet. His parents had been separated from him 3 days earlier, processed through different administrative channels that ensured no family bonds could interfere with the purity of imperial justice. The boy no longer spoke of gardens or peaceful skies. The interrogation methods approved for use on minors had efficiently burned such dangerous fantasies from his mind, leaving behind only the hollow compliance that marked properly processed imperial citizens. The confession extracted from Jorik became the template for all subsequent interrogations. Under the patient guidance of Interrogator Vex, a specialist in juvenile heresy cases, the child had provided detailed descriptions of his dreams, their frequency, and their emotional impact. These details were cross-referenced against known patterns of psychomanifestation, demon influence, and chaos corruption. While the analysis remained inconclusive, dreams of beauty and peace were unusual but not definitively heretical. The confession served its true purpose, providing the foundation for expanded investigations into anyone who had failed to report the child's suspicious behavior. Castor Helen's interrogation followed protocols refined through millennia of imperial justice. The techniques employed were not crude torture. Such methods were inefficient and potentially counterproductive when dealing with cases that required detailed information gathering. Instead, Interrogator Prime Maltheus employed psychological pressure, sleep deprivation, and the systematic destruction of hope to achieve the desired compliance. Castor's confession, when it finally came after 72 hours of continuous questioning, implicated not just his immediate family but an entire network of neighbors, co-workers, and acquaintances who had somehow failed in their duty to report suspicious activities. Each confession generated new targets for investigation, and each new target provided additional confessions that expanded the scope of the inquiry exponentially. Hala Halen, processed separately to prevent coordination of testimony with her husband, provided a different set of names and incidents that created a second wave of accusations. The contradictions between their testimonies were not seen as evidence of innocence but as proof of a conspiracy so deep that even the conspirators were unaware of its full extent. The beauty of the imperial justice system lay in its ability to transform any evidence into proof of guilt. Cooperation with interrogators demonstrated consciousness of guilt. Why else would someone be so eager to confess? Resistance to questioning indicated dangerous stubbornness that could only stem from heretical conviction. Consistency in testimony suggested rehearsed lies, while inconsistency proved deceptive intent. The system was perfectly calibrated to confirm the guilt of anyone subjected to its mechanisms. Martin Voss, whose association with Castor Helen had drawn him into the investigation, discovered that his strategic denunciation of his own family provided no protection from imperial scrutiny. His wife's confession, extracted through methods that left no permanent physical damage but thoroughly shattered her psychological resistance, revealed information about neighborhood social networks that implicated dozens of additional citizens. Their teenage daughter's interrogation uncovered evidence of an underground literary appreciation circle, a group of young people who had been sharing recreational reading materials beyond their assigned educational texts. The literary circle became the investigation's second major breakthrough. Under interrogation, its members revealed the existence of what Interrogator Vex classified as intellectual pride networks, informal groups where citizens had engaged in discussions of philosophy, history, and theoretical concepts beyond their station. The content of these discussions was largely irrelevant. The mere fact that citizens had presumed to engage in intellectual discourse without official authorization was sufficient evidence of dangerous deviation from approved patterns of thought. Mrs. Kellyan, whose initial denunciation had set the entire investigation in motion, found herself summoned for questioning when her name appeared repeatedly in other citizens' confessions. Her enthusiastic cooperation with imperial authorities was noted in her file but provided no immunity from suspicion. Experience had taught the Inquisition that the most eager denouncers often harbored the deepest guilt. Her interrogation revealed a lifetime of minor infractions, unauthorized sympathy for neighbors' hardships, occasional criticism of work assignments, and the cardinal sin of sometimes questioning whether imperial policies were truly necessary for the emperor's glory. The trials themselves followed a format perfected through 10,000 years of imperial jurisprudence. Citizens were brought before Arbiter Judge Kronos, a man whose augmetic replacements had long since rendered him more machine than human. His mechanical voice dispensed verdicts with the precision of a cogitator calculating shipping manifests, each sentence predetermined by algorithms that weighed evidence according to formulae developed by the most brilliant legal minds the Imperium had ever produced. The proceedings were not concerned with determining innocence or guilt. Such concepts were philosophical luxuries that the Imperium could not afford. Instead, the trials focused on cataloguing the precise nature and extent of each citizen's deviation from imperial perfection, then prescribing appropriate corrective measures. Some deviations could be addressed through re-education and supervised labor. Others required more permanent solutions. Jorik Halen's trial lasted exactly 7 minutes and 33 seconds. The evidence against him, his own confession of heretical dreams, corroborated by witness testimony and expert analysis, was overwhelming. Arbiter Judge Kronos pronounced the verdict in a voice devoid of emotion, guilty of psychic deviation and potential corruption. Sentence: immediate processing through sanctioned purification protocols. The boy's fate was sealed not by malice but by mathematical certainty. The algorithms of imperial justice had calculated that the risk he represented outweighed any potential value his continued existence might provide. His parents' trials followed similar patterns, their sentences determined not by their individual actions but by their statistical likelihood of harboring additional corruption. The Imperium had learned through bitter experience that heresy was often hereditary, passed down through bloodlines like genetic predispositions to disease. The safest solution was the complete elimination of potentially tainted family units, ensuring that no trace of corruption could survive to infect future generations. The trials continued in assembly-line fashion, processing dozens of citizens per day through a system that had been refined to achieve maximum efficiency with minimum expenditure of resources. Interrogator Vex noted with satisfaction that the average processing time per case had decreased by 20% compared to similar operations in other Hive blocks, a testament to the effectiveness of imperial methods and the proper conditioning of the local population. As the verdicts accumulated, patterns emerged that demonstrated the sophisticated nature of the corruption that had infected Hive Block Tertius 7. The Literary Appreciation Circle was revealed to be part of a larger network of intellectual pride that had spread through multiple Hab blocks. The informal childcare arrangements had created channels for the transmission of unauthorized ideas between families. Even the simple act of neighbors helping neighbors had created bonds of loyalty that competed with proper devotion to the Emperor. The documentation process was as important as the trials themselves. Each verdict was recorded in triplicate, with copies sent to the Administratum Archives, the local arbitrator headquarters, and the inquisitorial databases where they would be cross-referenced against future investigations. The names of the guilty were entered into the great ledgers of imperial justice, their crimes catalogued for posterity and their fates serving as warnings to any who might contemplate similar deviations. Yet beneath the surface of bureaucratic efficiency, something more terrible was beginning to emerge. The realization that the investigation had revealed not isolated pockets of heresy but a systemic corruption that might require solutions more comprehensive than individual trials and executions. The flames rose at dawn, their orange light painting the Hab block walls in shades of judgment and finality. The pyres had been constructed according to ancient specifications, their wooden frameworks blessed by sanctified oils and their bases inscribed with prayers of purification that would ensure the proper consecration of what was to come. Citizens were required to attend. Absence from the cleansing ceremony would itself be recorded as evidence of insufficient enthusiasm for imperial justice. The condemned were brought forward in groups, their processing organized with the same efficiency that marked every aspect of imperial administration. Jorik Halen walked among the first group, his small form dwarfed by the adults who shared his fate. The child's face showed no expression. The interrogation process had burned away his capacity for emotional response, leaving behind the hollow compliance that marked successful processing by imperial justice. His dreams of impossible gardens had been replaced by the proper emptiness that characterized a mind cleansed of dangerous thoughts. Castor and Halen followed in the second group, their eyes carefully avoiding their son's form among the condemned. The interrogation process had broken more than their will to resist. It had shattered their capacity to feel the bonds of family love that had once defined their existence. They walked to their deaths as strangers to each other and to the child they had brought into this galaxy of endless night, their humanity burned away by methods more efficient than any physical torture. The crowds that gathered to witness the cleansing stretched beyond the immediate residents of Hive Block Tertius 7. Citizens from adjacent sectors had been transported in to observe the consequences of insufficient vigilance against heretical corruption. Children were lifted onto their parents' shoulders to ensure clear views of the proceedings. The educational value of witnessing imperial justice was considered essential for proper civic development. Chief Arbitrator Karsk addressed the assembled multitude through vox amplifiers that carried his words to the furthest reaches of the crowd. "Behold the mercy of imperial justice," his mechanically enhanced voice proclaimed. "These citizens have been granted the ultimate blessing, purification through sacred fire that will cleanse their souls of the corruption that tainted their lives. In death, they served the Emperor more faithfully than they ever did in life." The first pyre was lit with ceremonial flames carried from the block's shrine to the Emperor, ensuring that the fire bore proper sanctification for its holy work. The condemned stood motionless as the flames began to climb, their conditioning preventing any unseemly display of fear or regret that might disturb the solemnity of the occasion. The crowd watched in silence, broken only by the crackling of burning wood and the ritualized chanting of imperial hymns led by servoskulls programmed with appropriate liturgical responses. But the individual executions were merely the prelude to something far more comprehensive. Agent 077 stepped forward, her featureless mask reflecting the firelight as she addressed the assembled citizens. When she spoke, her voice carried the absolute authority of the Emperor's own judgment, cutting through the morning air with the finality of a blade severing vital arteries. "The investigation has revealed corruption beyond individual guilt," she announced, each word precise and measured like the tolling of funeral bells. The heresy that infected these condemned souls was not an isolated phenomenon but a systemic contamination that has spread through the social networks of this community. Individual purification is insufficient. Comprehensive cleansing is required. The meaning of her words sank into the crowd with the slow horror of poison spreading through bloodstream. Citizens began to understand that they were not merely witnessing the execution of the guilty, but preparing for their own participation in a far more extensive purification process. The investigation had not ended with the trials. It had revealed the necessity for broader measures that would ensure the complete elimination of heretical influence. Entire HAB units were evacuated and their residents marched to expanded pyre sites that had been prepared during the night. Families that had lived in Hive Block Tertius 7 for generations found themselves condemned not for their individual actions but for their proximity to corruption. The mathematics of imperial security demanded the elimination of anyone who might have been exposed to heretical influence, regardless of their personal guilt or innocence. The scale of the purification exceeded even the most pessimistic expectations of the local arbitrator forces. Processing centers worked around the clock to catalog the condemned, their servoskull assistants maintaining precise records of names, ages, and alleged crimes for transmission to administratum archives. The bureaucracy of death operated with mechanical precision, ensuring that every detail of the cleansing was properly documented for future reference and analysis. Mrs. Kellyan, whose initial denunciation had triggered the investigation, found herself among the condemned despite her enthusiastic cooperation with imperial authorities. Her protests, that she had served loyally, that she had reported suspicious activities, that she had demonstrated proper imperial values, were noted in her file but provided no reprieve from the sentence that mathematical analysis had determined was necessary for comprehensive purification. The fires burned for 3 days and 3 nights, their smoke rising to form a pillar of ash that could be seen from orbit. Passing spacecraft recorded the phenomenon in their logs as evidence of successful Imperial pacification operations, another small victory in humanity's eternal struggle against the forces of corruption and chaos. The precise number of lives consumed was recorded in official documents that would be filed in archives and forgotten, their individual names becoming statistics in the great ledgers of Imperial administration. Citizens from neighboring Hive blocks watched the smoke and understood its message with perfect clarity. The Emperor's justice was thorough, impartial, and absolute. Corruption would be met with purification regardless of its scale or the cost of its elimination. The lesson was not lost on anyone who valued their continued existence. Vigilance against heresy was not just a civic duty but a survival necessity in a galaxy where suspicion was safer than trust. Yet even as the flames consumed the guilty and innocent alike, the true horror was not in the scale of destruction but in its systematic nature. Each death had been authorized by proper authority, documented according to established procedures, and justified by logical analysis of security requirements. The Imperium had not acted from cruelty or madness but from the mathematical certainty that such measures were necessary for the preservation of humanity against threats too terrible for mortal comprehension. The efficiency of the operation was noted with satisfaction by inquisitorial observers, who marked Hive Block Tertius 7 as a model for future purification efforts. The speed with which corruption had been identified, isolated, and eliminated demonstrated the proper functioning of Imperial systems and the effectiveness of citizen conditioning programs. The success would be studied, refined, and replicated across the galaxy wherever similar threats emerged. As the last flames died down to glowing embers, the true scope of what had been accomplished became clear. Not just the elimination of individual heretics, but the complete erasure of a community that had dared to harbor dangerous thoughts within its boundaries. In the aftermath of purification, silence settled over Hive Block Tertius 7 like ash from the cooling pyres. The emptiness was absolute, not just the absence of voices but the complete elimination of the social networks, family bonds, and community connections that had once given meaning to human existence in this corner of the Imperium. Where thousands had lived, worked, and dreamed their carefully regulated dreams, now only hollow hab units remained, their empty windows staring like the eye sockets of skulls. The cleanup operations began immediately, staffed by servitor units and supervised by administratum personnel wearing protective equipment against potential psychic contamination. Every personal possession was catalogued before incineration, every piece of furniture examined for hidden messages or heretical symbols before being fed to the recycling furnaces. The very walls of the hab units were scrubbed with blessed solutions to remove any trace of the corruption that had once festered within their boundaries. Supervisor Thane Mordek, assigned to oversee the decontamination process, moved through the empty spaces with a methodical precision that had made him valuable to the Imperium's cleansing operations. His augmetic eyes recorded everything for later analysis: the arrangement of furniture that might indicate unauthorized social gatherings, the wear patterns on floors that could reveal forbidden movement between units, the scorch marks on walls where loyalty purity seals had been removed or replaced. Every detail was evidence of the corruption that had been successfully eliminated. The few survivors of the purification, citizens whose loyalty had been deemed mathematically acceptable despite their proximity to heresy, wandered through the desolate hab block like ghosts haunting their own former lives. They had been relocated to temporary housing in adjacent sectors while their psychological conditioning was evaluated and reinforced through approved therapeutic techniques. Their faces showed the particular emptiness that marked individuals who had witnessed the complete destruction of their social reality and understood that their own survival was conditional upon never acknowledging what they had lost. Marissa Chen, age 37, had survived because her work assignments had kept her in different sectors during the critical period when heretical networks were most active. Her husband and children had not been so fortunate. Their names appeared on the purification lists between those of neighbors she had known since childhood. She now sat in a temporary hab unit, staring at walls that bore no familiar marks, surrounded by possessions that belonged to people whose faces she was no longer permitted to remember. The therapeutic sessions had been successful in eliminating her capacity to mourn, but they had also eliminated most of her capacity to feel anything at all. The silence was not peaceful, it was the silence of the grave, heavy with the weight of lives erased so thoroughly that even their memory had become dangerous. Citizens learned quickly that mentioning the names of the purged was itself a form of heresy, a demonstration of unhealthy attachment to individuals whose corruption had marked them for necessary elimination. Survival required not just avoiding mention of the dead, but cultivating the proper mindset that refused to acknowledge they had ever existed. Children who had played in the Hab Block's corridors were relocated to other sectors and enrolled in intensive re-education programs designed to overwrite traumatic memories with approved thoughts and reactions. Their young minds were considered more salvageable than adult consciousness, capable of being reformed through proper conditioning if the heretical influences of their early environment could be completely eliminated. The success rate of such programs was carefully monitored. Children who failed to adapt to their new psychological programming were quietly transferred to facilities where their continued existence would not pose security risks. The Imperial Cult established a new shrine in the center of the decontaminated area, its altar constructed from stones that had been blessed in the fires of purification. The shrine served multiple purposes, providing a focal point for proper devotional activities, demonstrating the Emperor's victory over corruption, and ensuring that the space could never again be used for unauthorized gatherings. Citizens from neighboring sectors were required to make pilgrimages to the shrine, where they would pray for the souls of the purged while simultaneously celebrating the wisdom of imperial justice that had saved them from similar corruption. Preacher Valdus, assigned to minister at the new shrine, delivered sermons that carefully balanced remembrance with warning. The citizens of Hive Block Tertius 7 were remembered not as individuals but as examples, their deaths serving as proof of the Emperor's mercy in providing clear guidance about the consequences of deviation from approved behavior. Their names were never spoken, but their fate was held up as a beacon of instruction for all who might be tempted towards similar paths of corruption. The economic impact of the purification was absorbed by imperial systems with characteristic efficiency. The labor shortages created by the elimination of several thousand workers were filled through reassignment of personnel from other sectors and the acceleration of servitor production programs. The empty hab units were eventually demolished and their materials recycled into new construction projects that bore no resemblance to the structures that had harbored heretical activities. Even the physical traces of the community were systematically erased, ensuring that no architectural remnants could serve as focal points for unauthorized remembrance. Official records of the Hive Block Tertius 7 incident were filed in administratum archives with appropriate security classifications. The documentation served as a case study for inquisitorial training programs, demonstrating the proper procedures for identifying, investigating, and eliminating community-level corruption. The efficiency metrics of the operation, processing time per individual, resource expenditure ratios, and psychological impact assessments, were analyzed and incorporated into improved protocols for future purification efforts. Agent 077 submitted her final report to Inquisitorial Command with notation that the operation had achieved complete success in its primary objectives. The heretical network had been eliminated, the risk of contamination spread had been neutralized, and the local population had been provided with clear instruction regarding the consequences of insufficient vigilance against corruption. The techniques employed would be refined and distributed to other inquisitorial cells facing similar challenges. Yet in the perfect silence of the decontaminated zone, something more terrible than the screams of the burning had taken root. The understanding that mourning itself had become heretical, that memory was dangerous, and that the only safe response to witnessing such comprehensive destruction was to cultivate the blessed ignorance that prevented dangerous questions from forming in properly conditioned minds. The silence spread beyond the boundaries of the former Hab block, infecting neighboring communities with its lesson of absolute compliance. Citizens learned to speak in whispers, to avoid forming attachments that could become vulnerabilities, and to practice the art of selective blindness that allowed them to ignore evidence of their neighbors' suffering. The most successful survivors were those who developed the capacity to watch their own family members disappear without allowing their faces to show recognition of loss. But routine never lasts in the Imperium, and even the most perfect silence eventually gives way to the eternal rhythm of suspicion and purification that marks human existence in the galaxy's darkest age. The cycle began anew with mechanical inevitability, as natural and inescapable as the rotation of worlds or the burning of stars. In Hive Block Secundus 9, only kilometers from the ash-covered ground that had once been Tertius 7, a maintenance worker named Kelvin Dross noticed that his daughter had been drawing pictures during her recreation periods. Not the approved subjects, Imperial eagles soaring over conquered worlds, space marines triumphant over alien foes, citizens laboring joyfully in service to the Golden Throne, but flowers. Simple, innocent flowers that bloomed in colors that existed nowhere in the toxic palette of Hive World reality. The report was filed on a Tuesday, exactly as regulations required. By Thursday, the whispers had begun. In the great administratum complexes of distant terror, servo-skulls processed the statistical data from countless worlds, their mechanical minds calculating patterns of heresy, rebellion, and corruption with mathematical precision. The numbers told a story that no human administrator had the clearance to read in its entirety, but the patterns were clear to those with sufficient authority to comprehend their meaning. Purification efforts were succeeding beyond projected parameters, eliminating heretical influences with efficiency rates that exceeded even the most optimistic forecasts. The success bred its own necessity. Each community cleansed created new standards of purity that neighboring sectors were expected to meet. The mathematical models that governed Imperial security operations demonstrated with algorithmic certainty that vigilance was not a destination but a process, not a goal achieved but a state continuously maintained through ever-increasing levels of scrutiny and ever-expanding definitions of suspicious behavior. Chief Arbitrator Karsk received his new assignment with the satisfaction of a professional recognizing familiar work. Hive Block Secundus 9 showed all the classical signs of incipient corruption. Citizens who had witnessed the purification of their neighbors yet failed to demonstrate sufficient enthusiasm for the educational value of their deaths. Such reaction patterns were well documented in arbitrator training manuals as indicators of sympathy for heretical elements, psychological resistance to imperial authority, and dangerous attachment to individuals whose elimination had been mathematically determined to serve the greater good. The investigation teams deployed with equipment still warm from their previous assignment, their servo-skulls updated with recognition patterns derived from analysis of the Tertius 7 operation. Interrogator Vex had refined his techniques based on lessons learned from processing the previous community, achieving new levels of efficiency in extracting confessions and identifying network connections between suspects. The forms had been updated, the protocols streamlined, and the mathematical models improved through incorporation of data from thousands of similar operations across the Imperium. In the deepest archives of the Inquisition, where records were maintained that chronicled 10 millennia of humanity's struggle against corruption, statisticians noted the gradual acceleration of purification cycles. The time between initial suspicion and comprehensive cleansing had decreased by measurable increments across multiple sectors, demonstrating the improved efficiency of imperial security systems and the proper conditioning of civilian populations. The trend lines projected continued improvement, approaching theoretical perfection in the identification and elimination of heretical influences before they could achieve critical mass. The beauty of the system lay in its self-reinforcing nature. Each purification created survivors who understood the consequences of insufficient vigilance, ensuring that future investigations would benefit from more cooperative witnesses and more enthusiastic denunciations. The mathematical models predicted that eventually, the system would achieve such efficiency that heretical thoughts would be identified and eliminated before they could be acted upon, creating a state of perfect imperial purity maintained through continuous low-level purification operations rather than dramatic large-scale cleansings. Yet even the most sophisticated mathematical models could not account for every variable, and in the spaces between calculations, something that defied quantification continued to persist. In the hearts of survivors, in the dreams of children, in the whispered prayers of those who had learned to mourn in silence, human nature continued its eternal resistance to the forces that sought to reshape it according to the needs of empire. The resistance was not rebellion. Such organized opposition had been eliminated through millennia of successful operations, but something more fundamental and more dangerous: the simple, stubborn refusal of the human spirit to be completely extinguished, no matter how perfect the systems designed to contain it. The eternal vigil continued, as it always had and always would, in a galaxy where the only certainty was that tomorrow's investigation would be more efficient than today's, and where survival was not evidence of innocence but merely proof that the fire had not yet reached you. In the darkness between the stars, where humanity clung to existence through faith, fear, and the systematic elimination of hope, the wheel of purification turned with the relentless precision of clockwork, grinding souls to dust in service to an empire that had forgotten how to distinguish between protection and annihilation. The witch hunts would continue until every dangerous thought had been burned away, until every suspicious dream had been reported and purified, until the only citizens who remained were those whose minds had been so thoroughly conditioned that they could no longer conceive of existence beyond the narrow parameters of acceptable thought and behavior. It was a future that approached with mathematical certainty, measured not in years or decades but in the gradually increasing efficiency of systems designed to achieve the perfect silence that marked true imperial peace. In that silence, broken only by the crackling of eternal fires and the mechanical voices of servo-skulls reciting loyalty oaths to empty streets, the Imperium would finally achieve its ultimate victory over the chaos of human nature, creating a galaxy where heresy was impossible because the capacity for independent thought had been systematically eliminated from every world, every hive, every hab block where humanity struggled to survive in the long darkness of the 41st millennium. The fire burns eternal, and its hunger knows no bounds.